Today I have for you something really special. I have the brand new Sony A9III and I have the Red Komodo. Both of these cameras today are running Blazer Remus series lenses. The Sony is running the 65mm and the Red is running the 100mm. I've tried to match these up the best as I can. The exposure is a balance in between the two. I didn't want to slap on any ND filters or anything because I want to give you the straight out of camera what they honestly can do. And a couple of things here. My concerns with the Sony, of course, are digital sharpening and how sharp the image is going to look. Is it going to look that very digital look? So I'm happy to run these Remus lenses because you can actually dial some of that out if you open up the lens a little. So hopefully that's been achieved. And, you know, on the Red as well, I think the Red might have the upper hand because that 100mm is on the softer side is what I'm told. In my experience, it is if you open it up as wide as it goes, it will get quite soft. But this is to be expected with an anamorphic lens. Honestly, they are great lenses though, and for the price. Between you and I had originally had the Mercury series lenses on order. That whole set was going to run about 25, 23, somewhere around about there for the entire set. These lenses, I got the entire thing for like $2,000. So it's kind of a no-brainer. And for someone like me who uses anamorphic, but it's not necessarily my bread and butter, I really feel that they are offering an amazing value for what they are. And even if one were to break, you could buy another set for less than it would cost you to get the Remus series repaired. So I feel in many ways it's a win-win-win for these lenses. So enough about lenses. Let me get to some points about the camera. This camera was for me very controversial. When Sony came out and they announced that they had made the first mirrorless camera with global shutter, I was ready to hear a detailed explanation on how they had solved all the problems, or to hear them say, frankly, we just didn't solve any of the problems. But then when they came out and they did that presentation, the guy just comes out on the stage and he's like, oh, and by the way, global shutter, yeah, hold my beer, we did that. I'm like, what? How did you solve all the problems? But they made so light of it, like, oh, we're Sony, don't you know? Solving this problem was no issue for us. And then I saw the CineD article, and they tested this camera, and they said it had the best exposure latitude of any mirrorless camera they'd ever tested. It actually ties for exposure latitude with the $30,000 Red V-Raptor X, which, this is extraordinary. Previously to that, there was one camera, the Fujifilm X-H2S, which I also own, which had gotten just under that, but this camera solidly hits the 9 stops, as does the Red V-Raptor X. So this essentially is the highest exposure latitude of any mirrorless camera ever. I needed to put those claims to the test, so I bought it, and I've been playing with it. I love this camera. I thought I was going to hate it. I own a Canon R3, as you know, and that has been like my go-to mirrorless for when it's serious stuff. I pull out the R3. Well, the R3's been gathering dust. This Sony is amazing, and it offers me something that the Red didn't. So the Red Komodo for me had the promise of stabilization in post, and the idea is that I would be able to bring the footage in, and because it has all that gyro data that is available to DaVinci Resolve or whatever third-party plugin, that I would be able to just pull that footage in, instantly stabilize it, much like the Blackmagic design cameras can do, but with none of the rolling shutter artifacts because it's a global shutter. But it didn't really play out that way, because when I bought the footage in, I realized that I would need to go through transcoding and blah blah blah, and it was an extra step, an extra painful step I didn't want to have to deal with. I didn't want to deal with that. So what I instead ended up doing was I didn't use that at all. But lo and behold, here it is. The Sony actually is able to work directly from the plugin of Gyroflow, so you get the promise of the Komodo, but strangely wearing a Sony Alpha badge. So it's an amazing camera. Just for the global shutter is amazing. That it also has best in class. I want to say best in class because with the new dynamic active stab, I think it is probably the best stabilization. Again, I'm eating my words because I always thought that the sensor was too big within the mount to be able to accommodate really good stabilization, but somehow or another they're Sony, I guess, and they've done it. And the dynamic active stave on this camera is about as good as I've actually seen out of anything. So we can check one box for the global shutter, check another box for exposure latitude, check another box for stabilization, and guess what? Never had a camera with autofocus anywhere near as good as this Sony. Ever. And I'm including other Sonys. It is simply the best autofocus I've ever used on any camera at any price. It beats the R3. It doesn't just beat the R3. It cleans the floor with the R3. It does, and that's Canon's best autofocusing camera. And I was left after the shooting with this camera. I just kind of sat back and I thought to myself, what have I just seen? And I had to process it. It takes a little time to process something like that, because I believe what I've seen in the Sony A9III is actually a major step. I'm not going to use the G word because I'm tired of everyone saying cameras are changes of things. But this is a huge step in mirrorless cameras. And I have to say, looking at these two cameras on the mono, I'm looking at the Red, and the highlights look like they look blown out. Maybe I won't be able to recover them in post. If I can't, that's on me. But as I look on the app, it looks like it's pretty well, if you can see the traffic lights, it's pretty well exposed. It's not bad. It should be easily recoverable. So if this continues to be like it's always been, I'll be able to pull down those highlights and this image will look great. On the Sony, if I look at the metering, it actually reads as +2. Now I realize that's taken in the whole image into account. It'll be interesting to see how these grade and which is more organic. The Red should, strictly speaking, have the upper hand in being more organic. And the reason why I say that, and I say, you know, not so digitally sharp, is because the Red is running a slightly softer lens. The 100 is known to be the softest of the trio for the Blazar Remus. So it might have an edge. But I'm very curious to see how these two cameras, how the footage grades. And if I screwed one up entirely really bad, I'll show you like a best case scenario shot individually with each camera, so you can realize I'm the one that screwed it up. Believe me, both these cameras can get an organic image. I've gotten a very organic image out of both. And here's one thing I have to share with you. There's been talk about the Sony gives a noisy image. Well, it can definitely give a noisy image. That is 100% true. But let me share with you this, what I do know. Even though it is a noisy image, it's the kind of noise like what the Red has. It's a very organic, fine-grained kind of noise. It's not a color-rich noise. It's a more of a monotone kind of noise. And it cleans up wonderfully in post. I've not had any issues with cleaning up the noise on either of these cameras in post. As a matter of fact, in addition to the global shutter, I would say the noise structure they also have in common. They both clean up really well. And here's a bonus that I didn't know. The Sony, if you shoot 1080p, and you'll get like a third, maybe less than about a third of the file size if you do that, it actually oversamples at 1080p, and it also has that same kind of very organic noise when it comes time to cleaning up. It is easy to clean up, and you end up with a very nice oversampled 1080p footage. It looks just great. It is wonderful to shoot with. Now you do lose some of the wonderful features that Sony has. The Sony does tricks that no other camera does, so you're able to, I can't do it on this because I turned it off, I think, but I'm gonna show you something if I can find it. Give me a sec. I can actually zoom in on the Sony, and this is what Sony calls clear image zoom. And from what I can see, unless you're really like zooming in like hundreds of %, and even then, there doesn't really appear to be any loss in image quality for doing this. And I really love that Sony has that kind of ingenuity that they could design something like this. It's amazing. What other camera does this? And the other nice thing is I set it up so that I have one of my buttons set to punch into Super 35. So if I need to punch in real quick, I can just hit a button and I punch right in, And then if I need to punch out, I can just punch right out. So it's just the flexibility that the Sony has that really, I think, now Nikon bought Red. That I guess the deal hasn't fully closed, but it's going to close, and they're going to end up with Red. I don't think Sony's jealous. They have all the technology and then some. So it's really going to be down to what Canon release next. I don't think the Canon anymore is playing in the same league as Sony. This camera has definitively given Sony the lead. And like I said, I have a lot of Canon glass. I have a lot of Canon cameras. I buy all this stuff. I don't get sponsored. I think one time someone sent me a camera, and I do thank them for that, but for the most part, no one ever sends me anything. So I buy these cameras. I'm going to tell you what I really think. And what I really think is that Sony has knocked it out of the park somehow with this A9III. Out of nowhere, they've gotten global shutter, the best image stabilization in the business, and the best autofocus I've ever seen, plus features that no other camera has. That is an achievement. And low light on this camera, not bad. Actually quite usable, but I will point this out for all you low light, crank up the ISO people. Your ISO, if you're shooting video, unless you're doing like documentary kind of work, if you're shooting anything that you're trying to get cinematic, you should never leave that base ISO. Light, use other means, don't leave the base ISO. That is your highest dynamic range, that is your lowest noise levels. So that's what I have for you. Anyway, like, subscribe, tell me what you think of this. Tell me which looks better. I'm gonna probably slice this up and dice it up so you can see side by sides and cut from one to the other. And I have no idea how these are gonna grade. I just threw this lighting up, you know, and hope for the best. I'm here by myself today, so I don't know, maybe I botched it all, but let me know what you think, and I will catch you next time.